Um, let's get us started. So welcome to Riverside Nature Center's monthly NED Talk. For those of you who are new to this platform, NED Talks are our nature education series, and we invite speakers to come in and from all different topics we cover. Earlier, I was talking about, earlier we had Steve Ramirez joining us and to talk about, his book and on casting forward. And I said, it's not just an angler's book, it's all about conservation and natural ecosystems and just all various things. But these talks just range a really variety of topics. And so thank you for coming today. And thank you for your donation as well. Always thank you for your donation. And so today, topic, bluebirding basics. And we have Dr. Chris Distel with us today. Those of you who, yeah, he's waving at us. Those of you who are not familiar with him, Distel is professor at Schreiner University. He's in the biology department. And just teaches, a variety of topics. I think, you're better qualified to tell them about yourself, but I mean, the thing with Dr. Distel so much is just, his commitment, not only to the science, but to his students, and very dedicated in working with undergraduate research. And, this gentleman's not just, talking, he walks the walk in his conservation efforts and such. And so we are very, very lucky to have him here in our community, as well as presenting today. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Distel, and so take it away.
Well, thank you, Becky. That was very kind introduction. I appreciate that very much. And I'm happy to see that several Schreiner students are on this Zoom meeting as well. So this is exciting. We've got a nice mixture of community members, Nature Center members, Nature Center associates, students, and other folks. So this is great. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to talk with you today. I've given a couple of talks to various groups at or through the Nature Center about different aspects of biology in our area. And this is one where I haven't directly done research, like collected original data on bluebirds, although I love birding very much. And I'm excited to talk about this in some ways from a less vulnerable perspective, because I'm not putting my data out there for you all to take a look at and rightfully scrutinize. So let's scrutinize other people's work together. Let's take a look at this. Let me pull my presentation up here. Oh, Becky, I've got sharing disabled through you. Could you set me able to share my screen, please? There we go.
Did that work for you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great.
All right, are you all able to see this now?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, it's a real delight to be able to talk about bluebirds with you. If there are any questions that you have throughout the presentation that I'm not able to get to at the end, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'm always happy to talk birds. My email is there at the bottom, cadistel@schreiner.edu. Let's start with what a bluebird is. Bluebirds are really well named. 3 species we have in Texas. The most widely distributed is the eastern bluebird, but we also have western bluebirds and mountain bluebirds. These are 3 discrete species, and really very aptly named for the blue color they have. But one of the things that always strikes me is that there is in invertebrates, including amphibians and reptiles and mammals, there is no blue pigment that's biologically produced. The blue color is a combination of light penetrating, in this case through feathers, hitting some pigments that are not blue, reflecting back and being intercepted by other pigments to filter out all the other colors except blue. We don't produce, these guys don't produce any blue pigment either. They're also best known for their brightly colored males, and you can see some subtle differences in color here. But eastern bluebirds have a blue cap and blue back and wings, and a brick colored breast and flanks. The western bluebird has around their back and shoulders a little bit more of that brick coloration. But the mountain bluebird seldom, if ever, displays any of that brick coloration. They're mostly bluish on the head and back and a very pale gray on the belly. It would be remiss of me not to mention the additional lady bluebirds. They do all the hard work and all the heavy lifting in the bluebird species, but they're much more drab in coloration, so they don't always get as much attention. In fact, people sometimes confuse female bluebirds for sparrows, warblers, flycatchers, those kinds of things that are often grayer or browner in color. But very often you'll see males and females, especially during breeding season, spending time together around nest boxes, sometimes sharing feeding areas and things like that. So we've got, within Texas, 3 species of bluebird. Now, right here in Kerrville, it would be an extreme rarity to see anything other than the eastern bluebird. But once you get out to our west, even a little bit, I saw recently some folks reporting what they were saying were western bluebirds from South Llano River State Park in Junction, which is relatively close. I was not able to go verify those, but those showed up on eBird. And then mountain bluebirds a little bit further out as well. So let's take a look just a little bit at their classification and find out how they are related to other birds. You see the species names here on the bottom for the eastern bluebird, Cialia cialis, western bluebird, Cialia mexicana, and then the mountain bluebird, Cialia curacoides. All of these species belong to the taxonomic order Passeriformes, which includes what are often colloquially called perching birds. The Passeriformes doesn't include all birds that perch. That's a bit of a misnomer. Things like hawks, for instance, are well known to perch, but it does include most of what we would call the songbirds. Within that order, there are multiple families. Bluebirds in North America belong to the family Turdidae, which are the thrushes. Now, when you get down to the genetic level, it turns out that bluebirds are most closely genetically related to other thrushes called solitaires, which we have only, I believe, 1 species of in North America. They're more of an alpine species, and the ant thrushes of Africa. All of our bluebirds belong to this same genus, Cialia, which when we look at the Latin derivation of the original Greek is a word that means a kind of bird, which is not very descriptive. Lots of taxonomists have done really nice jobs naming birds for their attributes, whether it be color or behavior or anatomy. But here we've got Cialia cialis here in Kerrville, which means bird. I didn't name it. I don't know what to tell you. Now, I think equally valuable to identifying and classifying bluebirds is identifying some things that are not bluebirds, but are commonly mistaken for them or maybe easily confused for bluebirds. In our area, chief among these are the buntings. We've got buntings that are pretty close in size to bluebirds. On the top there, you see the male indigo bunting. And on the bottom, you see the lazuli bunting, which is not super common in our area, but does show up from time to time. Both of these have blue feathers on their head and back, and the lazuli bunting even has brick red across the breast and flanks. So its color patterns are quite similar to bluebirds. How can we tell these are not bluebirds? Depends what kind of a look you get at them. If you, particularly with the lazuli bunting, if you see the wings, you'll see two white stripes on the wings. Bluebirds do not have those. If you see the indigo bunting, you'll see blue on the chest and belly and flanks. Bluebirds in genus Cialia do not have those. If you can get a good look at the bill, you'll see that these buntings have a pretty tall bill at the base. It's large where it connects with their face. It's pretty thick and robust relative to the size of their head. They like to eat seeds, and they use these big, heavy bills, relatively heavy for their size, for cracking through seeds. And bluebirds have a much thinner, pointier bill. Some other birds that may be blue but are not biologically bluebirds are the jays. We see these commonly in our area, the scrub jay on the left and the blue jay on the right. Scrub jays don't show up in town a whole lot, very occasionally, but blue jays are certainly comfortable in an urban and suburban environment. So when I talk today about bluebirds, I'm not talking about scrub jays or blue jays or their relatives. We have a couple of warblers in generally eastern and central North America, the cerulean warbler on the left and the black-throated blue warbler on the right, which have blue feathers on their head and backs. Also not bluebirds, not even very closely related. So lots of birds with blue coloration, visibly blue coloration. Of course, I don't want to leave anybody out. I can't go through all the possible birds that have blue in them, but I want to make sure you know the ruddy duck with its blue bill is also not a bluebird, just in case there was any confusion. Now, I mentioned that bluebirds are thrushes, and we actually do have several thrushes in North America and in our area. Most commonly seen is the American robin, the one shown here in the upper left. Even though these are usually grayish with that bright orange breast, that gray back, depending on the lighting and the age and the quality of the feathers at the time they're observed, that can take on kind of a bluish hue. So looking at other field marks to determine whether you're seeing a robin or a bluebird is appropriate there. We also have things like the hermit thrush, also on the top there. We've got the gray-cheeked thrush in the lower left, wood thrush in the bottom center, and the Swainson's thrush in the lower right with its peachy tawny colored markings around its face and eyes. So all of these are in the same biological family as bluebirds. And so genetically then, all of these are more closely related to bluebirds than anything we saw in the previous slide, even if it had blue feathers. So the presence of those blue feathers among bluebirds is unique in that particular lineage of thrushes. So here we've got the ranges of bluebirds, the 3 North American bluebird species, and you can see that the eastern and western bluebirds are fairly well named for their geographic distribution, although they do overlap in south central United States. And the mountain bluebird is present over much of the western United States. The colors here, if you're familiar with eBird at all, the colors here represent places that they spend time at different times of year. So the purple areas are places where they can be seen all year long. The redder areas are places where they spend time in the summer, their summer breeding range. And then the blue areas are places where they can be seen in their winter range. And the yellow are typically the areas that they may migrate through, although they don't necessarily reside for any long period of time in those areas. And if we zoom in just on Texas, we can see that of the 3 species, the eastern bluebird can be seen throughout most of Texas, most of the year. The map on the left there shows the eastern bluebird range in purple. And certainly where we are in the hill country, we get the presence of bluebirds all year long. They may not be as visible, especially outside of breeding season. They may shift their behavior some, but we certainly got them here. Western and mountain bluebirds just do approach the hill country. They just approach our area. And mountain bluebirds have an area that they winter along the Balcones Escarpment to the east of us, but don't spend a whole lot of time right here in Kerr County. So let's take a look at some different biological and behavioral attributes of the bluebirds. Bluebirds and indeed thrushes are often considered to be insectivorous. As those of us who are birders often observe, bluebirds might sit on a perch and fly down to catch a bug or pick a bug off of a branch. Similarly, robins are often seen on the ground going after insects or spiders or even pulling worms from their burrows, earthworms from their burrows. And in the spring and summer and early winter, insects and invertebrates are the bulk of the diet of bluebirds and other thrushes. And so they don't really show up much at feeders during those times. It would be pretty uncommon to see a bluebird at your seed feeder during those times. But they do shift their diet in winter because, as you saw in the last slide, a lot of these birds, especially the eastern bluebirds, are residents here all year long. And so when insects trying to take cover during winter months, they're exothermic, so they avoid the coldest times of year. The bluebirds will come out and forage in other ways. They'll find fruits as often as they can, but they may take occasional seeds and buds and things like that as well. One of the nice things about bluebirds for those wishing to observe them is that they like to hang out in fairly open areas that have some trees around. And that means we can often see them flying back and forth to and from a perch or to and from a nest cavity or to and from a nest box. So they can be seen in a variety of habitats, and many of those habitats are fairly urban. Urban parks, farms, homes that have large yards with a few trees are all perfectly suitable habitats for bluebirds. Those of you who spend any time in Kerrville probably know some good bluebird hotspots around town. You can occasionally see them in Louise Hayes Park right downtown. One of my favorite places to see them is Flat Rock Park on the east side of town, right along the river. There are some nice tall trees there, and the bluebirds like to come and go, but they hunt insects throughout the open areas. And then, of course, as you get outside of town, forest edges and meadows, bluebirds are not deterred by altitude. They will certainly forage high up in hills and mountains if the meadows present themselves and enough insect prey are present. Some people wonder about where bluebirds spend their time, if they migrate. The answer is it's kind of complicated. Bluebirds are what are called facultative migrants, which means they will migrate if the situation dictates that they should. Typically, these are short-term migrations. Unlike a lot of North American warblers, some populations of robin, a lot of our waterfowl, they're not going to automatically fly south for the winter, spend several months south of us, and then automatically fly back north in the spring. Bluebirds will move around. They don't stay fixated on one habitat apart from during nesting season. They may move great distances in search of food. Typically, though, if things get too cold, they'll move to the next closest place that is warm or where food is available. This can be across latitude from north to south, but it can also be across elevation. So for birds that are higher up in mountains, when the snows come earlier, these birds may simply move downhill. It might not be very far at all in terms of latitude or longitude, but they're getting to warmer areas with more insect prey. Now, one of the best places to see bluebirds is around their nesting areas, whether those are natural nesting areas or whether they are synthetic nesting areas like those that humans build. Very common to see bluebirds naturally using abandoned woodpecker nests, the areas that have been, chiseled out by the woodpeckers in trees like you see in the upper left here, or sometimes even in cacti. Bluebirds like to nest in cavities. So if they can find a natural cavity like that, they will surely use it. But they will also use synthetic nest areas pretty readily. So bluebird boxes are a very common feature for people to build. Here you can see a couple examples of bluebird boxes. And in the lower right, you can see a synthetic nest cavity that was not intended to be one. This is an old T-post. And in the end of that T-post, you can see that a bird has climbed in and built some nest inside and is defending its territory on top. The male is there. Bluebirds are pretty territorial about their nest areas. So once a male has identified a place that he would like to attract a female toward, he will clean out the nest if necessary, bring in new nesting material if necessary, and then advertise to that female with song and with visual display, and probably in many cases advertise to multiple females until he can convince one to mate with him and stay with him at that nest area. Then the parents will cooperatively feed their young. Now, in this case, being territorial is extremely important. For one, that male does not want to give up his hard work on the nest to another male. So if he's cleaned out a nest cavity and brought in new nesting material, and then a neighboring male simply flies in and can occupy that space, the first male has wasted time and energy he could have been using in securing food or mates. So from the evolutionary perspective, that's not beneficial. So he'll defend his territory pretty readily against other males. And then the female, once a female agrees to mate with a male, will help in territorial defense in trying to keep out other bluebirds from their nest box, but also keep away potential predators from their young. Bluebirds are one of the bird species that is territorial enough that in modern times, they will attack their own reflection in a mirror. And so it's not uncommon to see bluebirds perched near parking lots, seeing their reflection in a car mirror and swooping down and pecking at it and clawing at it to try to scare it away, when in fact it's a waste of time. They don't know that, but it's a waste of time for them. So let's talk just a little bit about bluebird boxes. Becky had mentioned that you all are thinking at the Nature Center and having conversations about when and how to build bluebird boxes. This is a good time of year to be thinking about putting those out or refreshing the ones that you have. People have come up with several different effective designs for bluebird boxes. There's not one that everybody agrees is the absolute best. And depending on your goals as the host of the box, you may want to favor one model over another. Some minimum requirements for bluebird boxes, if you want to be successful at attracting the birds, you'd like an entrance hole. It should be right around 1.5 inches in diameter. Much smaller, and the birds can't easily get in and out. And they need to be able to get in and out with nesting material and food items for the young. However, if it's much bigger than 1.5 inches, then you might start attracting other things that are less favorable. For one thing, it might make it easier for predators to get in or to reach in. You can imagine a raccoon finding its way to the top of a box like this. If it can reach its arm in and grab eggs or young, it surely will. But also other cavity nesting birds. Woodpeckers, some of the larger woodpeckers would be attracted to a situation like this, and you'd want to try to keep them out with a smaller hole. And if the hole's too big, then you could attract even predators themselves for nesting. Things like kestrels or screech owls might find that box attractive. It's nice at the very top of the walls to have vent holes or slits. This allows for some circulation of air to come out. When the hatchlings first come out in any nest, but this is especially an issue for cavity nesters, and they start relieving themselves in the nest, the parents often will take those droppings and try to move them out of the nest. But as efficient as they try to be, some remain behind. And the more liquidy those droppings are, the more ammonia fumes can build up inside that cavity. And so having some airflow to vent those fumes out is really important. The floor of the nest box should be no smaller than 4 inches by 4 inches. Bluebirds will use larger surface area boxes, and probably would try, some bluebirds, especially inexperienced ones, might try in smaller footprint boxes. But 4 inches by 4 inches gives them enough room to build their nest. It gives them enough room for at least one parent to be in there with some young at any given time, and sometimes two parents to be in there. The wood choice is very important. You want this to last. It's better not to have to refresh your box every season or every year. So rot-resistant wood is nice, but you also want it to be non-toxic. If you get something that's been pressure treated, for instance, it might off-gas some fumes that could be potentially toxic to the birds that are inside, especially the young who are stuck inside until their flight feathers grow. Generally, you want to mount this on a pole. A half-inch pole is great for reasons I'll talk about here in just a moment, but not in a tree. It's not that bluebirds won't use the box if it's mounted in a tree, but one of the things that makes a half-inch pole attractive is that it's hard for potential predators to grasp that and climb up. So if you're thinking of things that are arboreal or semi-arboreal that might predate these boxes, raccoons are decent climbers, possums are quite good climbers, rat snakes are excellent tree climbers and can get into these holes easily. There are a few other things. Some hawks can probably, depending on how things are oriented, reach a long leg in. If they're a long-legged hawk like a Cooper's hawk, reach in and grab something. So having a pole that's about a half-inch in diameter makes it difficult for those things to grasp on and climb up, even snakes. Not impossible, but difficult. Also, depending where you mount it, and if you know that there are certain predators around, you might mount it at different heights, probably not below about 4 feet off the ground, but you could go as high as about 10 feet off the ground, and bluebirds would still use it for a nest box and produce a successful brood. Now let's talk about threats. This is a mosaic from ancient Pompeii before it got covered in ash. And even the ancient Pompeians knew that cats were a big deal for birds. Cats are bird killers. They are really, really effective at it. And so you want to be cognizant of the possibility that a cat could walk onto your property and get to bluebirds, particularly if the box is lower to the ground or if it's mounted in a tree. If you have cats, keep them indoors if you're trying to welcome birds to nest in your area. Even well-fed cats that seem docile and that seem unlikely to hunt wild prey are quite effective hunters. And even though we've had now domestic cats in North America in the neighborhood of 400 years, that is not enough time for all different species of bird, especially small birds, to recognize them as a potential threat and have the evolutionary faculties to get away. So cats are a pressing threat for all birds, really. Introduced European house sparrows are another threat. This species is a cavity nester. They love nesting in cavities. It's one of the things that makes them so successful in urban areas. Here you see a male. The females are a little more drab. They don't have the high contrast gray, brown, and black markings on their face. But they are about the same size as the bluebirds that we have in Texas. And as cavity nesters, they can fit through the same size hole that bluebirds can. So often folks who are trying to encourage bluebirds in their area and set up a bluebird nest box are finding themselves struggling with these Eurasian house sparrows, which are widespread. So I'll talk in a minute about a couple of techniques to try to discourage house sparrows before they ever get there. But of course, if you know you have house sparrows nesting in your bluebird box, you can try to clean out their nesting materials before they've laid eggs if you want to avoid killing any of them. Or some people don't mind killing them, and so you could take out the eggs or the nestlings if you so choose. That is certainly an effective way to discourage them as well. Pesticides are another big threat to bluebirds, and they have been a bigger threat than they are today. I think bluebirds are pretty objectively recovering from pesticide threats, but because of their habitat preferences, they like areas that are pretty open but have a fair number of bugs and some perching areas. Crop fields, orchards, they're wonderful hunting grounds from a bluebird's perspective. So as people apply pesticides to their crops to discourage insects, from eating the crops, they're reducing the food supply for the bluebirds, and also potentially slowly intoxicating those bluebirds in such a way that they could reduce their brood size, reduce the viability of the offspring if they do hatch, or just simply make the parents more lethargic and less likely to go find food to bring home. So here are some passive threat abatement strategies for bluebird boxes. On the left there, you see a little rig that just has some foil or streamers. Mylar is what's commonly used. This visibly seems to just scare away house sparrows in a way that doesn't appear to bother bluebirds very much. So these are just some strips of mylar that are hanging up above the box, and they blow around in the wind and reflect the light, and that seems to be enough to discourage at least some house sparrows from coming into the nest box. There are different arrangements of this. Some people like them on the top like this. Some people would put flanges on the sides, or some distance out in the front of the opening. You can look online for strategies that you think might be best if this is something that appeals to you. Here on the right, you see a discouragement tube for potentially climbing predators. Things like snakes and raccoons might climb up a pole to a certain height, but then if there is a wider pole, and the important part here is that the underside is open, that it's hollow, but the top is closed, they climb up inside and then can go no further, but that doesn't stop the bluebirds from coming and going. The Ohio Bluebird Society has a great quote: "It's better to have no house at all than to have house sparrows nest in one." If you set up your bluebird house and house sparrows come in and nest in it one season, then if they nest early, then by the end of that season, you potentially have even more house sparrows ready to set up a second set of nests. And certainly the next season, you may have some house sparrows come back looking for nesting opportunities. So some strategies to avoid that have to do with nest box placement. It's discouraged to set up your nest boxes right close to a house or close to barns or silos, because house sparrows often do very well in those areas. They take advantage of the little nooks and crannies around roof soffits and things like that for nesting, and they then would see a nest box close by and may take advantage of it. So keeping it, if you can, a couple of 100 yards away from buildings and structures is ideal. Closing them during the winter is great. And here there are varying degrees of effort involved. Some people would take the whole nest box down during the winter, clean it all the way out, and put it out again early the next spring. Some folks would simply clean it out in place and plug the hole. And you can plug the hole with something as easy as wadded up paper or foil. And some people may not even clean it out at all, but just plug the hole so that house sparrows can't come and go during wintertime. And then finally, it's important to discourage house sparrows. It's important not to put a perch on these bluebird houses. Bluebirds don't need a perch to come and go from their nest boxes, but house sparrows really like it. And a few other birds too, like some wrens. And so if you have a perch, they're more likely to be colonized by non-target species. So with those few pointers in mind, I'm happy to take any questions that you have. I'm happy to discuss anything further, but I appreciate your time and attention today in this general overview of bluebirds. Thank you.
Chris, we did have a question in our chat from Amy.
Yes.
And she wanted to know of any issues, or are there issues of wasps harming birds in nest boxes?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I did not, so here's my qualified response. I did not encounter that as one of the most pressing issues when thinking about nest box construction. With that in mind, as a biologist, I have a hard time imagining that wasps wouldn't sometimes get into bluebird boxes. And if individuals are coming and going on a regular basis, then I imagine that would disrupt some wasps. Some probably can coexist. Some of the wasps that build smaller nests, smaller hanging nests, I can conceive that they might build one on the underside of the back part of the roof, and they might coexist okay with the bluebirds. Or even that if the bluebirds notice them, they might try to eat them. But I can certainly imagine a situation where, especially if you did not close up your nest box over the winter, a few warm spring days is all it takes for a female to come in and start building a new wasp nest, and that might discourage bluebirds from ever setting up shop in that nest to begin with.
I have also heard that in preparation, when you're cleaning out your boxes, you may take just some non-scented, natural, beeswax or Dove soap. I've heard ivory soap bar, and by kind of scratching that on the roof of your nest box, on the inside roof, that
Right.
discourages the wasps and such.
Yeah, that
as
would give
well.
them less texture to attach their nest to.
Yeah. We do have another question. Let's see here. We've got several questions. This is fantastic.
Great.
Kyle wants to know, because bluebirds are territorial, is there a recommended distance between nesting boxes?
That's a great question. So part of it depends on species. A lot of it depends on location. There are, in many states, there are bluebird societies, people really interested in this group of species particularly. And Becky, I don't actually know if you at the Nature Center have a relationship with the Bluebird Society. Is that a resource you take advantage of?
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to contact them.
Okay.
I've reached out on numerous occasions and don't receive a reply, but I understand that it's a, full volunteer, organization.
Sure,
And
sure.
I'm sure, that their website though has such wonderful resource information.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say, Kyle. In different habitats, different locations, I would really probably go to the website of the local Bluebird Society and look at their recommendations, because in a place that's rich with resources and where trees are closer together, you'd imagine that bluebirds would be able to get along with each other with nest boxes that are closer. And so it's going to depend on where you're trying to set up.
Let's see here. Patty and Paul wanted to know if nest boxes can be mounted on fence or fence posts.
The short answer is absolutely. They can be mounted on fences and on fence posts. I've seen plenty of successful bluebird boxes on fences and fence posts. What I would suggest you consider in doing that is that fences are climbable by medium-sized mammal predators and by snakes. So you are increasing the risk of predation of that nest box. Whether it's on a fence post or on a single metal pole in a yard or a field by itself, that won't probably affect the risk of house sparrows, but it will affect the risk of predators.
Okay. Let's see here. Regina is wondering about shade. She's concerned that the baby birds might overheat inside of a box.
That's a great question too. Bluebirds often in nature, when they're using natural cavities in trees, will use cavities that are mostly or even completely exposed. So they, if you can imagine a dead snag, a dead tree that's in a cluster of trees or maybe even by itself, not at all uncommon to see bluebirds nesting in something like that. Some of the most successful bluebird nest boxes are right out in the open. Shade won't discourage them necessarily, but you shouldn't worry too much about having a nest box. If all you have is open land and you want to put a nest box out there, that should be fine. It's really important, though, to make sure that the top of the walls have a space for ventilation so that air can move through the box.
Let's see here. We have from Linda. She's wondering, how tall should that 1/2-inch pole be?
Oh, that's a good question. I forgot to write that down when I was looking at various dimensions of nest box plans. I will have to get back to you on that. It doesn't matter so much how far it is from the top. It can be various distances from the top, but you want it to be a certain height off the bottom so that enough nesting material can be built up in the bottom for the eggs to be laid, the young to be reared, and not have them be clearly visible from just looking out the front, or even worse, have one of those babies walk sideways a little bit and fall out. That would be really bad.
Let's see here. So Amy is wondering if you have any suggestions for selecting where to place boxes. Should they face a particular direction? She has titmice, wrens, and flycatchers in her boxes, but never bluebirds.
Okay, so if titmice and wrens and flycatchers are the issue, then it sounds like you have a woody area nearby. If you have enough land, and Amy, I'm not sure what your situation is, but if you have enough land to put the nest box 50 or 100 yards from the line of trees near an open area, that is going to decrease things like flycatchers, although maybe not phoebes. So keeping that entrance hole to 1.5 inches or maybe 1.4 inches is probably your best defense there. Now, titmice and wrens are tricky. Wrens, will move around very easily in fence lines, brushy areas, low vegetation gardens, and so in trying to discourage wrens, one of the things you can do is constant vigilance. Well, I'll tell you one thing here's your trade-off. One thing that will make the nest box more attractive to wrens is a smaller opening. If you get too small, only wrens are going to fit through it. And so that's great. And wrens, we've got several native species of wrens and they're wonderful. But if your target is bluebirds and you build a nest box or buy a nest box that has a roof that can open or a sidewall that can open, you can check that nest box every day and see if anybody's building anything in it, and make sure you're watching from a distance, probably with your binoculars or your spotting scope, to see if bluebirds are visiting. If you know that it's wrens or titmice or flycatchers visiting and they're building nests in there, then you can keep after that nest box every day and just scoop out the nesting material until, if and when, bluebirds show up, hopefully. That is a labor-intensive process, though, I realize that.
All right. Let's see here. Diana wants to know if she should be supplementing bluebirds with mealworms during breeding season.
Great question. Boy, should is a tricky word here. There are trade-offs. It depends. It depends what your goals are. Bluebirds, I think, would certainly thank you for mealworms during breeding season if they're alive. If the bluebirds are alive, I guess if the bluebirds are dead, they're not going to care. But if the mealworms are alive, they'll be much more attractive to the bluebirds than dead mealworms, dried mealworms. There's no real issue with that so long as the bluebirds or any other birds are going to come and grab those live mealworms right away. I would discourage you from putting them out, and then if no birds are coming by, leaving them there, because in most cases the mealworms you can buy at the store that are alive are not native, and so if they get out, then you're introducing a new species to the environment.
So two points that I wanted to bring people's attention to on the chat. I have listed, we are fortunate to have Carol Hagemeyer in our audience today. She is a distributor for the Texas Bluebird Society, and she has bluebird boxes available for sale. And
Great.
so in the chat is her phone number and email address. She lives in Medina. So if you were interested in contacting her, you've got that information. And also, Peggy wanted to bring up that the NABS fact sheet on getting started with bluebirds is available online with the bluebirdsociety.org. And so, we had talked about earlier, lots of bluebird nest box plans, you know, are available out there, and great sources, Texas Bluebird Society, as well as just bluebirdsociety.org. And I think Cialis, right? So isn't there a website as well? SI, the scientific name, and now I'm
Yeah.
yeah, Cialis.org. So okay, so yeah, and Carol's saying Texas Bluebird Society.org. So, oh, good question from Regina. Sorry about that, Regina. What water sources are what water sources help? She's asking.
So to keep any birds around in your area, having a water source available is a great benefit. A nice visible water source. The ones that I have seen working best, simply attract the most birds, are close to food, they are partially shaded, and if possible, they're flowing. That keeps things pretty fresh. It keeps bugs from breeding in there and algae and bacteria from building up. Bluebirds will certainly come to those water sources, although don't assume that if you have a water source and bluebirds aren't coming to it, that they won't use your area. That's not necessarily true either. They eat pretty juicy food as a rule. So the grubs and things that they're eating, even the berries that they eat, have pretty high water content. And so they may not visit your feeder, your water source as often as a seed eater like a cardinal or a sparrow or something like that.
So just a comment from Diana she wanted to share with people is she actually pairs her nest boxes. Each pair is placed about 100 yards apart. So different species of birds will nest side by side. So she gets wrens or flycatchers nesting next to bluebirds. And she believes if the nests were not paired, she'd probably only get Bewick's wrens. So,
Nice.
yeah.
Diana, would you mind commenting further? When you pair those, are the openings facing the same direction or are they back to back?
Diana, if you wanted to mute yourself. Oh, same directions, she's saying. Yeah.
Great.
So do we have any other questions? These have all been fantastic questions. Yeah, really, really glad to be able to answer your questions. Not me, but Dr. Distel did. And so
you're helping me out here, Becky. I appreciate it.
Any others? No? Okay. Well, I got to tell you, again, huge round of applause. Thank you so much for, coming today.